For years, Rhaenyra Targaryen believed one thing above all else, that the Iron Throne was hers. Not because she wanted power for power's sake, but because her father, King Viserys I, had chosen her. Before the lords of Westeros, before the realm, before the gods, she was named heir. She spent her entire life preparing for that destiny. And yet, the throne that was meant to secure her legacy would instead destroy her family, consume her supporters, and ultimately lead her straight into the jaws of her own death. Because Rhaenyra Targaryen did not die peacefully in a castle surrounded by loved ones. She was not buried with honor. She wasn't defeated in a glorious battle. She was betrayed, hunted, reduced from queen to fugitive. And in the end, she was eaten alive by a dragon. Not just any dragon. The dragon belonged to her own half-brother, her rival, the man history remembers as King Aegon II. But to understand how one of the most powerful women in Targaryen history met such a horrifying end, we have to begin with the moment everything started falling apart. Because Rhaenyra actually came incredibly close to winning the Dance of the Dragons. After years of brutal civil war, she finally captured King's Landing. The city opened its gates. Aegon II had fled after suffering terrible injuries. His magnificent dragon, Sunfire, had been left so badly wounded that many believed it would never fly again. The Greens appeared broken. One by one, Rhaenyra's enemies either died, surrendered, or escaped. For the first time since Viserys died, she finally sat upon the Iron Throne. The throne her father had promised her, the throne she had dreamed about since she was a young girl. It should have been the happiest moment of her life. Instead, it became the beginning of her nightmare. Because ruling is far harder than conquering. King's Landing was starving. The royal treasury had mysteriously disappeared before her arrival. The money was gone. The crown was drowning in debt. Food prices exploded. Merchants refused to cooperate. The small folk were hungry, angry, and desperate. To pay for the war, Rhaenyra imposed heavy taxes. It wasn't greed. She simply had no choice. Armies needed feeding. Castles needed supplies, ships needed repairs. The war wasn't over. But to the people living inside King's Landing, none of that mattered. All they knew was that life had become worse. Far worse. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that the Iron Throne itself rejected Rhaenyra. Every time she sat upon it, its razor-sharp blades seemed to cut her. Whether this was coincidence or something more symbolic, the stories spread quickly. Many began calling her King Maegor with teats, one of the cruelest insults imaginable, comparing her to Maegor the Cruel, the infamous tyrant who ruled through fear and bloodshed. It didn't matter whether the comparison was fair. Perception was becoming reality, and perception can destroy a ruler just as surely as any army. Meanwhile, outside the city, the war continued to consume dragons. Prince Daemon, Rhaenyra's greatest commander and perhaps the most dangerous warrior in Westeros, made one final decision. He knew there was only one enemy left capable of changing the war. Prince Aemond One-Eye, mounted on Vhagar, the largest living dragon in the world. Daemon understood something terrifying. As long as Aemond lived, no one was truly safe. So he challenged him, not with armies, not with politics, but with dragons. The battle above the God's Eye became one of the greatest duels in Targaryen history. Caraxes against Vhagar, a fight between monsters. The skies exploded with fire. The dragons tore into one another with claws and teeth. Then, Daemon did something almost impossible. He leaped from Caraxes in midair, landed on Vhagar's back, and drove Darksister straight through Aemond's remaining eye. The prince died instantly. Moments later, both dragons crashed into the God's Eye below. Neither truly survived the fall. Daemon's body was never conclusively found. Many believed he died alongside his nephew. Others claimed he somehow escaped. But history remembers that day as the end of the rogue prince. For Rhaenyra, it was devastating. She had lost her husband, her greatest military commander, perhaps the only person ruthless enough to keep her enemies afraid. And the losses didn't stop there. Her eldest sons were gone. Lucerys had been killed above Shipbreaker Bay by Aemond and Vhagar. Jacaerys died during the Battle of the Gullet while trying to defend the Valyrian fleet. Joffrey would soon die attempting to ride Syrax without permission during the chaos in King's Landing. One by one, the children she fought so desperately to protect were disappearing. Every victory demanded another sacrifice. Every step toward the throne cost another member of her family. Even the dragons, the very creatures that had made House Targaryen nearly unstoppable, were dying faster than they could be replaced. Then came the disaster no one expected. Not a battle, not an assassination, not another dragon duel, an uprising. The starving people of King's Landing had finally had enough. A prophet known as the Shepherd convinced thousands that dragons were demons sent to punish mankind. The mob surged through the streets, their target, the dragon pit. Thousands of ordinary men and women armed with axes, spears, hammers, and sheer desperation marched toward creatures that had ruled the skies for generations. It sounded like suicide, yet desperation makes people capable of extraordinary things. Before the night was over, several dragons lay dead. Some fought until their last breath. Others were trapped inside the collapsing dragon pit. The unthinkable had happened. Common people had slaughtered dragons. The illusion of Targaryen invincibility was shattered forever. And when Rhaenyra learned what had happened, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't just losing the war anymore. She was losing her kingdom. The fall of King's Landing didn't happen all at once. It happened one terrible decision at a time. The city no longer feared its queen. The dragons that had once guaranteed Targaryen supremacy were dead, dying, or scattered across the realm. The streets filled with riots, looting, and panic. Even those who had sworn loyalty to Rhaenyra began questioning whether she could still protect them. Then came another crushing blow. Prince Joffrey Valerian, her youngest son by Laenor Valerian, heard that the dragon pit was under attack. Desperate to save the dragons, the boy raced through the city toward Syrax, his mother's dragon. There was only one problem. Syrax was not his dragon. A dragon chooses its rider, and Joffrey's dragon, Tyraxes, was miles away. Ignoring every warning, the young prince climbed onto Syrax's back. The dragon took to the sky. For one brief, breathtaking moment, it looked as though the prince had succeeded. Then Syrax twisted violently. Joffrey lost his grip. Thousands watched as the prince fell from the heavens. His body smashed onto the cobblestones below. He was only 13 years old. Imagine what that moment must have done to Rhaenyra. She had already buried sons. Now another child was gone. Not on a battlefield, not by an enemy's sword, but in a desperate attempt to save his family's dragons. Grief became rage, rage became paranoia, and paranoia became isolation. The queen stopped trusting almost everyone around her. She suspected betrayal at every turn. Some of those fears were justified, others were not. But in war, the difference hardly matters. As King's Landing descended into complete chaos, Rhaenyra realized something she had never imagined. The capital was no longer hers. The city she had fought so hard to capture had become a prison. Her supporters urged her to flee before it was too late. Reluctantly, she agreed. In the dead of night, the queen slipped out of King's Landing with the few loyal followers she had left. Gone were the magnificent processions. Gone were the cheering crowds. Gone was the image of a triumphant queen. Instead, Rhaenyra rode through the darkness as a refugee. The Iron Throne, the object of her entire life's struggle, was behind her once again. And this time, she would never sit upon it again. She still had one hope. Dragonstone, the ancient seat of House Targaryen, the island where she had been raised, the castle where she had been proclaimed heir. Surely, if there was any place left in the world where she would be safe, it was there. She gathered what remained of her household, including her young son, Aegon, the boy history would later know as Aegon III. The journey across Blackwater Bay was miserable. Storms battered the ships. Supplies were scarce. Many who followed her had already lost everything. Yet there was still hope. Dragonstone represented a fresh beginning, or so they believed. What Rhaenyra did not know was that fate had already beaten her there. While she struggled to escape King's Landing, Aegon II's supporters had quietly moved. Dragonstone had been infiltrated. The castle's commander, Sir Alfred Broome, had abandoned Rhaenyra's cause. Waiting inside the fortress was a shocking sight: Aegon II. The king everyone thought was broken. The man she believed had been driven from power. He had reached Dragonstone before she did, and he wasn't alone. Beside him rested a dragon many assumed would never recover from its wounds. Sunfire, the Golden, once considered the most beautiful dragon ever hatched. During the dance, Sunfire had suffered horrific injuries. Its wing had been torn, Its body was scarred beyond recognition. It had crawled across the countryside like a dying beast. Yet somehow, against all expectations, the dragon had survived. It was battered, it was crippled, but it was still alive, and so was its rider. Neither brother nor sister knew that destiny had brought them back to the very island where their rivalry had truly begun. Rhaenyra's ships approached Dragonstone expecting sanctuary. Instead, they sailed directly into a trap. As soon as the queen landed, armed men surrounded her. There was no escape, no army waiting to rescue her, no dragons swooping down from the clouds. She had walked willingly into the hands of her greatest enemy. The queen who had once commanded dozens of lords was now a prisoner, standing before Aegon II, the brother she had spent years trying to overthrow. The war was finally over. But for Rhaenyra, the worst was still to come, because Aegon had no intention of granting mercy. He wanted the realm to witness what happened to those who challenged his crown, and he had chosen a punishment so horrifying that even centuries later, the tale would still be whispered across Westeros. There are many brutal deaths in the history of Westeros. Kings have been beheaded, princes have been poisoned, queens have been murdered in their own beds. But few endings are as haunting or as symbolic as the death of Rhaenyra Targaryen. When she was dragged before Aegon II at Dragonstone, she was almost unrecognizable. Gone was the proud princess named heir by King Viserys. Gone was the queen who had marched into King's Landing in triumph. Years of war had taken everything from her. She had lost sons, friends, dragons, allies, her treasury, her capital, even the loyalty of many who had once sworn to die for her. Standing before her was the half-brother she had fought for years to defeat. Aegon was hardly in better condition. He had suffered terrible burns and broken bones during the war. Much of his body remained permanently damaged, and he could barely walk without assistance. Yet despite his shattered health, he had won the one victory that mattered most. His rival stood before him in chains. History records that Rhaenyra begged for mercy, not for herself, but for her surviving son, young Aegon. The boy was all she had left. Her eldest sons were dead. Her dragons were gone. If her own life could not be spared, perhaps his could. Aegon II agreed to keep the child alive. But there was a cruel condition. The boy would watch his mother's execution. Imagine the horror. A child, barely old enough to understand the politics that had torn his family apart, forced to witness the final moments of the woman who had protected him since birth. It was not simply an execution. It was psychological warfare, a message to every remaining supporter of the Blacks. This is what happens when you challenge the king. Then Aegon gave the order. Sunfire. Despite his horrific wounds, the once glorious golden dragon obeyed. The dragon lumbered toward the captive queen. At first, nothing happened. Some accounts claim Sunfire hesitated, weakened by his injuries and exhausted from years of war. Others say the dragon simply studied Rhaenyra. Then the attack began. With one snap of his massive jaws, Sunfire seized the queen. The dragon's teeth crushed bone as easily as dry branches. According to Fire and Blood, Rhaenyra was consumed by dragonfire and torn apart by Sunfire, while her young son watched in helpless terror. The execution was said to have lasted only moments. When it was over, very little remained. The woman who had spent her life fighting for the Iron Throne had been reduced to ashes and scattered remains. She was just 33 years old. And yet, in one of history's greatest ironies, Aegon II's victory was hollow. He had killed his rival, but he had not secured his future. The realm was exhausted. The great houses were still marching. Many of them had no intention of accepting him as king simply because Rhaenyra was dead. In fact, her death hardened the resolve of many Black supporters. To them, she had become a martyr. Armies continued advancing toward King's Landing. The North marched south. The Riverlords gathered their strength. The Vale remained committed to her cause. The war had outgrown the people who started it. Rhaenyra was dead, but the Dance of the Dragons was not. In the end, the conflict consumed nearly everything House Targaryen held dear. Dragons that had once darkened the skies lay dead. Entire bloodlines vanished. Ancient castles burned. The dynasty that had conquered Westeros on Dragonback emerged victorious only in name. Its greatest source of power was disappearing forever. Perhaps the cruelest twist of all concerns the frightened boy who watched his mother die. Young Aegon, the child Aegon had spared. The child forced to witness Sunfire devour his own mother. That boy would eventually become King Aegon III, the Dragonbane. And what kind of king did that trauma create? A ruler who hated dragons. A king haunted by what they had done to his family. The dragons were once the pride of House Targaryen, but for Aegon, they were monsters. The image of Sunfire killing his mother would never leave him, and in many ways that single moment symbolized the true ending of the Dance of the Dragons. Not when armies stopped fighting, not when treaties were signed, but when a child looked upon a dragon, not with awe as his ancestors had, but with fear and grief. Because the war had not only destroyed a queen, it had destroyed the bond between House Targaryen and the creatures that made them kings. And that loss would echo through the centuries, all the way to the birth of Daenerys Targaryen, when dragons would finally return to the world after generations of silence. Rhaenyra never wore the crown for long. She never enjoyed the peaceful reign she believed her father intended for her. History would debate whether she was the rightful queen or merely a claimant, but no one could deny one thing. Her life and her horrific death changed the fate of House Targaryen forever. The Iron Throne she sacrificed everything to claim outlived her, but the price it demanded was a dynasty broken, a kingdom scarred, and a family that would never truly recover.